The views and opinions expressed by the following program are those of the host, guest, and callers and are not necessarily those of this station or the Webster Rockhill Ministries, its management, or other host or underwriting sponsors. Programs presented on KWRH-LP are for educational and entertainment purposes only.
Welcome back to In Tune. This is Arnold Stricker with Ellie Wharton. We are moving from our conversation previously to now we're going to be talking about something that's going on this weekend, and it's an ongoing project that actually takes place at a variety of times of year. It's the Chamber Projects St. Louis, and in studio we have Dana Hotle, a long O, and David Werfelmann. And David is a composer. Dana is the executive director. And I'm going to read their bios, and then we're going to have a big Q&A here. So I'm going to start with Dana first. She's a clarinet player, which obviously she's wonderful because Ellie plays clarinet too. So
Wait, there's 3 clarinet players in the room?
3 clarinet players, and we could do a trio.
We could have a band.
There you go. We could do some chamber music here.
What do you play, Chris?
He plays the radio.
A little piano.
Okay, there you go. There we go. So Dana can be heard performing in both her home state of Missouri and Illinois. She's currently the principal clarinet with the Illinois Symphony Orchestra, performs with the Winter Opera St. Louis. She's a former member of the Equinox Chamber Players and the Cedar Rapids Symphony. She performs with the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, Opera Theater of St. Louis, right here in Webster Groves. As a regular substitute musician, has a Bachelor's of Music from the University of Illinois, Go Illini at Champaign-Urbana, and a Master of Music from Manhattan School of Music. She teaches at the Community Music School at Webster University's Festival Director for the Gersher Music Festival, as well as serving as Executive Director for the Chamber Project. And David Werfelmann is an award-winning composer of instrumental, vocal, and electronic music, whose works are widely performed and recorded by ensembles and soloists throughout the United States. His orchestral music has been performed by the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra, as well as major orchestras of the University of Southern California Thornton School of Music, the Indiana University Jacobs School of Music, and the Lawrence University Conservatory of Music. He is heard frequently at concerts and festivals and recitals around the United States. He's received commissions from many, many places, including music teachers associations, instrumentalists. He's professionally recorded by a variety of groups, and he's originally from Portland, Oregon, received his degrees from USC, Indiana University, and Lawrence University. He's a percussionist, a committed educator, and has held teaching positions at Lawrence University, USC, and is currently at Webster University, where he's the assistant professor of music and director of the BA program in music. Welcome.
So when do these people have time to sleep?
All right.
That's a good question.
That is a good question.
Yeah.
My goodness, I mean, you all are some busy, busy people.
We have both probably have our hands in a lot of projects.
Yeah, and I think that it comes in waves too. There's times where you're right, we're just not sleeping at all, and and then the piece is written, and then I hand it over to Dana,
And then I
and
stop
she
sleeping.
doesn't get to sleep for a while.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So tell us about Chamber Project St. Louis. What are the origins? I know this is your 12th season?
This is our 12th season.
Yes.
So we're a chamber music group and a mixed ensemble chamber music group. And what that means is we perform concerts where there's anywhere from maybe 2 to 7, maybe 10 people on stage at a time, but averaging 4 to 6 musicians per piece of music. Maybe 3 is pretty common too. And each concert has a different group of musicians. So sometimes it's all strings, sometimes it's winds and piano, or there's harp or percussion or vocalists, so every concert has a different mix of musicians. And so this is our 12th season. And something that's really important to us in Chamber Project is to really be a part of and to grow a local music scene. And so we've really focused a lot on the last few years. I think this is our 4th or 5th year of our commissioning project. So we've been commissioning exclusively local composers. This year we have 3 composers that we've commissioned to write new pieces of music for us. And David's is the first, and it's fantastic. So we're really excited to have his piece. We'll be premiering it Saturday night.
And that's Saturday night in the venue, because your venues change, correct?
Yeah, every concert's in a different venue too. So, which is we actually, curate the programs to fit the venues, and vice versa.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and we it's fun because our audience gets to explore the city, right? You get to try different things, and there's some venues we go year after year after year everybody loves, and then every year we try to try a couple new places and just get out and see some different parts of the city, different rooms. It's a lot of fun.
And this is going to be at is it 509?
This is at the 560 Music Center,
560.
which is part part of the Washington University campus. It used to be CASA years ago. It was CASA, right? So they've renovated that space beautifully. And so it's really become a hub of chamber music in the city. I mean, there's just so much great stuff happening at that place, and we're happy to be a part of it.
You know, I'm looking at your October 11th concert, Resilient.
Yes.
And, it's interesting because right now I'm reading a lot about resilience and what resilience really means. And, a lot of times we don't really see it as one of the things that you say here, failing well. Yeah. Because we believe, we are in a culture where we do not give credit to failing.
Yeah.
There's no, Super Bowl, the only people that were in the Super Bowl were the winners.
Right.
Okay. The guys who came in second are cream puffs, even though they beat out every other team. The fact that they didn't win it at the Super Bowl, they get trashed.
Failure is what makes, is what made Thomas Edison continue.
Right.
That's
along the way.
That's right.
So failure is not something to.
That's right. And Abraham Lincoln.
Go home.
Especially, we look at failure. But in our culture, we don't look at failure as something that we learn from, that we thrive for, and that we then go forward. So I'm so happy to see that in that you call it recovery, reflection, and failing well.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, all of our concerts are themed, so you just picked up on that. And then we flush out that theme through the stories of the music. So it might be something about the composer, or the piece itself tells a story that relates to that theme. And also, I think resilient for us as musicians, we're failing all of the time, right? That's how you learn. You make all these, as you're learning in your music, you make mistake after mistake after mistake, and you practice and practice and practice so that you don't make those mistakes, right? So we're failing, and we have to fail well or we would quit, right? Like, we have to be able to learn from that and move forward and get the good stuff out of that. What did you learn from that, right? I mean, that's just our daily practice, is literally to fail. So we relate to that resilient theme quite a bit in a lot of ways, but that's going to be a really, really fantastic concert.
So David, the theme is window. And it's through the looking glass, and as I recall, you're looking at architecture, and I'll let you take off. What was motivating you when you wrote this particular piece?
Well, I'll tell you, but after this conversation about resilience and failure, I kind of wish it was more on that concert. I mean, that seems to be more in line with my approach to composing and working through the process, and it is, like Dana said, I mean, it's just a routine act to fail and to bounce from that and to recover. And then you're right, you learn from those experiences. I think every step of the way is all about that. But I knew that my piece was going to be programmed on the window through the looking glass concert. And so I was thinking about this while I was writing the piece. How does my piece fit in with that? And one thing that happened to me over the summer, I had some time to travel in Europe, and I went to the Versailles Palace, and right outside of Paris, there's this really beautiful room called the Hall of Mirrors, and it's gorgeous because you walk in. It's a massive banquet hall that Louis XIV, invited all his guests to. But on one side of it is this wall of mirrors. Right down the middle is this large banquet table with massive chandeliers that are hanging from above. And on the right-hand side are these windows that go from floor to ceiling. And it's this amazing effect of this light coming through the room and being refracted through the chandeliers and then against this opposite wall. And this really struck me. Had been thinking really hard about the piece and working on it at this point, but I hadn't really touched on what was my connection to this theme until this moment. I was like, okay, I've got to explore this idea in my music. So, I think to greater or lesser extent, you might be able to hear this through the piece itself. There are moments where I play with this idea of reflection and refraction. And I know that I went to a rehearsal of this concert just the other day and was able to listen to Chamber Project perform this portion. So there's this moment in the piece where there's a musical idea that's played exactly the same in 3 different parts with one change, that they all start 1/8 note apart from each other.
We failed at this one a lot. I'm just going to put that out.
This turned into
a lot of failure for a while in rehearsal.
Sure. And I mean, each one of the parts are like pretty simple,
Yeah,
right?
the
on their
individual
own.
parts are not hard.
It's when you take this idea that is identical and you shift it by just the smallest amount of time for each part, and that's where the textural effect comes in. That's one of the ways in which I was trying to capture this idea of reflection and light through this piece. The effect is actually really nice because you get the blend of the different instruments, and actually different chords kind of stack up in this way. But it's a simple idea. So it's one simple musical idea that's just passed between the instruments in different ways. So, I love this. So the piece, by the way, is called On Vitreous Forms. Vitreous is a cool word. Maybe you haven't heard it, but it means objects that are glass-like, right? So thinking about all of the different kinds of textures and imagery that comes from glass. It could be smooth and reflective. It can be brittle and sharp and hard, and all the different variations of all of that. So, I think what an audience member will get away from this is that there are very different and distinct kind of textures and moods that are presented in the piece, and it kind of cycles through these and cycles back through them at the second half of the piece.
Let's listen to a portion of his composition in vitreous glass.
On Vitreous Forms.
On Vitreous Forms. So that instrumentation, you have flute, clarinet, violin, cello, 2 pianos, and percussion?
Actually, this is just one piano, no percussion on this. There's, I think, some other piece on the concert with percussion.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's a quintet: flute, clarinet, violin, cello, and piano.
And that was the very beginning.
Okay.
It's just the little introduction.
But you know what? That gave me a feeling immediately. It made me feel very fairy-like.
Oh, yeah.
a
And that
little
I
fluttery.
was
Yeah.
and that like I was in the forest with a fairy.
Cool.
I wasn't the fairy, but the fairy was in the forest with me, kind of leading, and I was skipping.
Yeah.
Very carefree along with. And it was very flowing, very reflective. That's how it made me feel immediately.
It's funny that you say that, because this happens to me a lot when I write a piece of music, where I don't tend to think in very specific imagery or narrative formats like that. But audience members often come up to me immediately after the concert, the premiere, and they tell me exactly what they saw. And I've been told that some of my music is cinematic. Again, I'm not an aspiring film composer, and I'm not thinking along those lines as I write music, but I think that's maybe tapping into a shared experience that we have as an audience member, a listener, a composer, performer, is that we often associate these musical ideas that are very abstract, right? I mean, there's no story here. There's no text to present you with that image, but you capture it anyway by maybe reaching into the shared musical experience that we all have.
I even saw colors.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I see a lot of even playing this where I'm having to count really, really hard because I have to count really.
Sure.
Like there's a lot of color in this piece and in your
lot.
music, and I think we talk about color as musicians in a very technical way,
Right.
Yeah.
but I think to people who aren't you're both musicians, you play the clarinet, right? So you know what I mean by color, but that is something people pick up on, even if they're not, it's green and there's sunlight coming through the trees or,
It was
whatever
very
it
refractive.
is. Right?
That's what
It's
it
very
was.
refractive.
Yes.
And there's a lot of really bright, shiny colors in this piece that are really appealing. Like it's really beautiful and it sparkles. I mean, there's like a
That's a good
sparkle
way of
thing that
putting it,
happens in
yes.
this music. But it's also really, we haven't really talked about it, but it's, there's so much going on, but it sounds simple, this piece, right? Which is awesome. I think
Right.
that's what musicians like that, and the audience likes it too, because there's a lot to get out of it.
Sure.
Right.
And it made sense to me what you were saying about the inspiration of it, because like I said, as I was just listening to those few seconds of it, I was transformed into a forest. There was the light coming through the trees, through the leaves, and this fairy, which was very colorful, kind of sparkly, purplish, pinkish, bluish, kind of skipping along, and I'm following right along with it, very happy. So what do I take away from that? Okay, now you being my psychiatrist. Do I need meds or what?
No, you need to go to the concert tomorrow night.
That's right.
Ah, what a segue.
David, what causes an inspiration then, or like a motif, or how do you like you hear what people say, and it's not what you had conceptualized. What had you conceptualized when you were writing this?
Yeah.
Or is that a fair question?
It's a very fair question. Each piece is a little different. There are sometimes, well, for me it's rare, but it happens, especially if I'm working with text, where I'll have a title or a concept that's kind of given to me by what I'm working with. That wasn't really the case here, except for the theme I knew I wanted to tie it into. So more typically, and as was the case here, is I was searching for musical ideas to take and to develop. And the way that happens for me, it is actually kind of abstract. I guess I work with instrumental music so much that I find some rhetorical meaning in a musical idea. So it doesn't have to be tied to a particular image, but there's like I think the piece starts off with not to get too technical, but triads, just two triads that are set a third apart. That's the first notes that you hear in three of the instruments of the ensemble. Well, that's a really simple and basic idea, just two chords right next to each other. But then that gives me ideas for how the piece is going to proceed as it moves ahead. Now, I just to kind of tie back into this idea of failure and how that's really reflected in this piece is my process typically is about following these different leads of musical ideas and seeing if they take me somewhere. And over the years, I think in the last 5 or so years, I've gotten a lot more comfortable with if something doesn't work, if it's not working out, or if it's not right for this piece, I set it aside. And I remember as a student composer, years ago, that would scare me. I had deadlines. I needed to get.
Had to force it.
Exactly. I had to force it. I'd make everything work. Well, I think in those cases, the work suffered. And at this point, it's like if I go through that process and I weed things out, I do know a lot more about the piece. I know what's not going to be there and what the piece is not about. So I'd say actually I have several drafts of the beginning of this piece that never made it into the final version. They may work in pieces in the future, but for my process, it's really about exploring. I'm just trying to find it. It's like I'm not a visual artist, but I imagine that it's somewhat similar to sculpting, where there's this big block of stone and you don't know exactly what it is, but you have a sense of the final product. And it's all about finding that by carving things away. And the form really emerges as I get into the piece.
And that's very interesting that you say that, because we've talked to many artists on the show, and they say something very similar. We've talked to sculptors and we've talked to, just painters, and then they will look at a painting and maybe they've been working on it for several months, and it's just and they'll dab on it and they'll put it away because it's just not quite. It hasn't conceptualized for them to a point where I can put my signature on this.
Sure.
As Thomas Hart Benton did, and he would make clay molds. He would take photographs. He would do many different drawings and things like that. And then finally he would do the actual oil, or it was the eggshell tempera. But that whole thought process of the arts, it's very similar probably to someone who writes. And, I have this idea in my head, or no, that's, I'll just put that on the shelf, and maybe years later they pull that off and it's ripe for them to develop and to pursue.
Yeah, well, actually, this summer I picked up a writing book. It's really good, and I think it applies more broadly than just writing. But it's called Bird by Bird, and the author talks. It's basically giving writing lessons. I mean, she is a writing instructor, and so many of her lessons were applicable to what I'm doing, and especially the kind of getting away from the filter that's kind of constantly on as an artist, where you want your work to be, this is the best work I've ever done, and I think in some ways that's in a positive way motivating, but in other ways it can really hold you down. But I know that artists from all disciplines are dealing with the same kind of thing, where they know that they want to achieve something, but that can also be something that's kind of getting in the way of what they're working on.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I think art making I always think about art making as, so my husband's an art teacher.
Okay.
And we talk about art making a lot, like the act of creating something, right? And it's really, to me, it's just a series. It's not just, but it is a series of decisions. And if in your head you're always doubting, is this the right decision? That can really hold you back. Like, you have to get into that flow state where and in music, you're making these decisions exceptionally rapidly, right? Like, am I loud enough? Is this the right note? Am I in the right place? Like, it's really comes at you really, really fast. Whereas when you're painting, you can put it on a shelf and think about that decision for months if you want to, right? Or whatever it is, but you still have to find that state where you're making decisions and you're trusting your instincts. You're also being critical in a way that improves your work without getting stuck in this, is it good enough place of judgment, right? So there's this, they call it a flow state, right? And I think, especially in the performing arts, but even composing or writing or painting, like, you'll get into this space where you're able to make the decision. You don't even know you're making decisions. You're just creating. But then there are other days where you're like, everything is a decision.
And it's the technical portion, and then it's the creative portion, which then frees you in that flow state you can't many times get to I found personally, you can't get to the flow state if your technical abilities have not allowed you to move into
Totally.
that.
You have to have that broad experience so that you're not cognitively thinking about every single step, right? And as a musician like Dana and the ensemble, they're not making these decisions always on a very conscious level. Sometimes that's emerging from the experience.
We've trained, 10 years ago practicing, we made a series of decisions, and those have stuck with us, right? Yeah.
I will say that one of the things that helped me write this piece was knowing the ensemble. And I got a great opportunity to work with Dana last year. She was in residence with my composition studio at Webster University. And so I got to see her perform and how she worked. And of course, I've been going to the Chamber Project St. Louis concerts for years. So really knowing the ensemble and what kind of music they wanted, Dana was really clear about what kind of piece she wanted.
Yeah. We knew exactly. We were like, we want an exciting piece to end the program.
Yeah. No, she told me right away that it was a closer. And she wanted it fast. She showed me some pieces that she listened to of mine on my website. Yeah. And she's like, I like that. And so that did clarify a lot for me, because I knew what type of piece she was after. I knew the time frame of like when they would start rehearsing to when they would perform it. And certainly there's some challenging parts to the piece, but wouldn't you say, Dana, that it's also like laid out in a way that you could get in and get out in a week or two?
Yeah, it's great. And it's a really good challenge. Like, I think as difficult as some of those spots were for us rhythmically to figure out, like, it's really fun because then you get it right and the effect is so cool. Like, it's absolutely worth the work because then the music sounds so good once you get it. So yeah, it's been fantastic. It's a great piece. So
we've got a couple minutes, David, and I know you're only going to be with us this half hour. Quickly, I'd love to have you back on the show and talk more about this. This is fascinating to me.
I'd love to.
What advice can you give a budding composer or someone a student who's like, I'd really like to do that. I have an interest in that.
Okay. So, the first thing, and I have students who are budding composers, so I give this advice a lot. The most important thing is to continue to write and to not be, wait for the perfect opportunity to come to you. Write your music and find those opportunities. The second thing I'd like to say, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but really tying it back to this idea of failure and failing well. You're not writing your magnum opus when you're 19, 20 years old or whenever you're starting, I think of every single piece as a stepping stone to my next piece. And I think that's served me very well in my career. I think young composers should think about the same thing, that this piece is going to make sure that their next piece is even better. And they can continue to go in that sense.
That's great advice. And Dana, where can we hear this composition tomorrow? So
it's tomorrow night at 7:30 at the 560 Music Center, which is on Delmar across from City Hall. You can visit our website at chamberprojectstl.org, and tickets and all that stuff is available there.
Okay. Yep. Folks, we've got a wonderful series going on, and you can check them out at the website, the Chamber Project St. Louis. And David, we're grateful that you came in today. It's been great having you on the show, and we'll have you back to talk about this in more detail.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
You're listening to Arnold Stricker and Ellie Wharton of In Tune on KWRHLP 92.9 FM, your community radio station in Webster Groves, Missouri.
You will.
Welcome back to In Tune. This is Arnold Stricker with Ellie Wharton.
That's me. Had to catch. Who's he talking about?
Oh,
me.
Oh, I'm looking at you right now. We have Dana Hotle in with the studio
That's
today.
her.
That's Dana. She's a...
That's right. For those that are on Facebook, they won't get confused. Ellie.
Arnold.
Dana.
So
Chris.
Dana,
Yes.
I can't see him.
I'm the invisible guy in the picture.
He's just a voice that comes out of nowhere.
He's got a head of hair, though.
I need a reverb on my voice. I think it's God talking.
Exactly. Put it in one of those tunnels. Dana, tell us about the origin of Chamber Project St. Louis, because I think when people think of chamber music, they think of, France and Germany, and
Falling asleep in the middle of the concert.
that the king has got the little court going on. You got a little small group, and then they've got their tights and their wigs on, and that's the, I'm going to say, stereotype chamber music kind of visual that some people may be thinking about. But I loved how you are really kind of breaking that down and just
Absolutely.
destroying it, essentially. And I love this, that you wanted to share music that we love with each other in our community. And how can we not be boring and stuffy, and how can we smash through all those quote-unquote classical music stereotypes? I love that.
Yeah,
Thanks,
because
yeah.
think about it. We have to dress a certain way. If we don't have our chamber music clothes,
Yeah, there's a lot of tradition. I mean, the thing about any tradition, of course, like everything has baseball traditions. I mean, there's all traditions, right? And every tradition has some positive things, I think, and maybe some things that need to be rethunk. And, especially in classical music, we sometimes get a little, this is the way it's always been, right? And there are parts of that are valuable, of those traditions, but some of them, they just don't fit, especially with chamber music, right? Like chamber music is something, so some of the origins of chamber music do go all the way back to 18th century Europe and, this very sort of court royalty thing. But then in the 19th century, it really was something that went more into the salon, which would have been a group of friends, many of whom would have been composers or poets or artists or whatever, and they would have gathered and shared their most current work with each other, right? So there were like these sort of informal, not really necessarily public events with chamber music. And that idea of just sharing music with your friends and making it a community-based thing, like a place to build community, right? Like this is a shared ground. Doesn't matter whatever else is happening with you. You can come to this concert, you can share this music, you can talk about, it made me think of fairies in the woods or whatever, and then you have a connection with someone else in your community. And through that music and through our themes and our storytelling, we give our audience even more to talk about and think about and have a drink during the concert. And so we kind of just relax a lot of those stereotypes, I think, a lot. We talk from the stage a lot. There's rarely a backstage, so we walk off the stage into the audience. We play in bars and tap rooms and art galleries and just different kind of places.
So it's like you're bringing the art form to the people.
Definitely.
And that's the thing that I think that theater and chamber music has always had as its challenge, is how to really bring it to the average Joe guy, Joe girl.
Right. And that's really like one of the things we talk about all the time, especially when we first got started 12 years ago, is like, we love this music. We're just normal people. We shop at Schnucks and Target and, we're just like everybody else. And how can we let people in on this? Because this is good stuff. You know, we like it. You don't have to know that much about it to enjoy it, right?
That's right. It's like people like watching the running of the bulls, but that doesn't mean that they're going to run.
Right, exactly, right? And there's so much great music out there and so many different kinds of music. And how can we be as welcoming as possible to people who know nothing about music or might be intimidated by the big concert hall, where there are to this day, and for some good reasons, actually, once you get to know it, like these traditions. It's like going to a faith service of a faith that you've never gone to, right? Like if you're Christian, going to a Jewish service or vice versa. I was in a Hindu temple a couple weeks ago, and I had no idea what was going on, right? But it was so interesting just to see. And, once you're initiated into the rituals, then you're like, oh, I get it, right? But it can be really intimidating. And so we've dropped a lot of it in what we do, the way we present concerts.
And I know some things the symphony worries about, and even opera theater worries about, and other musical groups like that. How do we keep this going to the next generation? How do we draw young people in so they still like to come down to the symphony hall or go to see the opera? And I think you're kind of bridging some of those things, maybe even for them in some ways, where, another one, Alarm Will Sound. We know about that group, and they've been in a lot. But how have you what things have you purposefully done to kind of bring another generation in?
Well, I think two or three things. I think one, which I'd like to talk more about, which is the programming, but sort of the more upfront stuff is, I think the venues, we're always trying to find venues that where people already are, the Schlafly Tap Room, like people want to go there already, right? So let's go play some music there. As we've grown, a lot of those spaces we've actually physically grown out of because our audience is getting a little too big. So like we played at Four Hands for a while, and we've played at the Vino Gallery, but we need more than 40 seats. So we've had to move into some bigger spaces. But just that idea of taking the music where people already are, they want to go. So we're going to do art galleries and art museum. And by shifting it around, I think it also makes it more inviting that you're not going to this one spot, So the venue selection, we always try to make it possible to have a drink or two with the concert, and just to meet people. The intermissions are as long as it takes for people to get their second drink, right? Like we're not really like ding, 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 get in your seat. We just keep an eye on the line and all right, here we go. We're going to start.
Because what happens then is that you then slurp, 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 because by the time especially at Opera Theater St. Louis, it's like by the time I come out at intermission, you got to get in line.
Oh, they have the sippy cups now.
I know. But before it was like, you get your drink just in time and it's like ding, ding, ding.
Ding, ding, you got to chug it like you're in college, right? Yeah, no, I know. So
I missed that second half.
Yeah.
Do I get a refund?
But of course, we're small, agile, and we program our music accordingly. Like we don't program 2 hours of actual music and then have to cram it in. Like we there's space to breathe in our programs.
So in other words, there's room to go to the bathroom.
Plenty. We actually wait. On our audience,
unlike us here.
Yeah, right. You just gotta go. So, that and just, some of it's in the marketing too, like the way we phrase it and stuff. But once you start to get some newbies in there, they bring their friends, they love it. The storytelling, the thematic programming, I think really invites people in because it's interesting to people who already know a lot about classical music because they're seeing it in a different way.
Right.
We're always programming. We're not a new music ensemble, not like Alarm Will Sound, right? So we play Beethoven and Mozart and Brahms and all the traditional, we call them affectionately the dead white guys. We call them that too. Yeah, we play all those guys, of course. But about half of our programming is by living composers, many of whom, if not most, depending on the programming of the year, are like very underrepresented, right? So women and people of color and, underrepresented ethnic heritage, all that kind of stuff. We really focus on that programming and people love that. They love the stories of that. They love, especially people, you'd be surprised, the people who are new to classical music, they are a lot more open to contemporary music than the people who know about classical music. So that's been very eye-opening to us. And we're also, through the theme, like it gives you a story and a context for each piece of music to listen to. Like it just gives you a little more information and then you can even if you've never heard of the composer, you've never heard music like this before, it gives you something to hold on to,
It
right?
unifies things together.
And it
quite a bit
unifies
more.
things. And for people who know a lot about classical music, it gives them like a new perspective.
Right.
Like, oh, I didn't know that, or listen to this new music. And over the years, our steadfast audience members, of whom we have many, like I don't know any of these composers on the program, but I know I'm going to like them because of the way you select the music. Like, we're really careful about it.
So, Ellie, about what she said in diversity, each concert features music of locally connected composers. There's usually 3 world premieres. And the diversity, 5 of 6 of the programs this year include music by African-American composers, 6 pieces total, 3 by African-American women. 1 of them is local, one's from Kansas City. 1 Iranian-American, 1 Sri Lankan who grew up in Dubai, lives in Canada. 7 pieces by women. All but 1 are contemporary, still living. Each concert features at least 1 piece by a local regional composer. 3 of the local composers are doing specially commissioned pieces. So, and then the stats, I love the stats down here, about 8 of 22 dead white guys, 3 of 22 dead people of color, 11 of 22 living composers.
I got really into my stats. I have them all right here.
I thought that was hilarious.
Dead people of color, dead white guys of color.
Right, I know. You can
no
go
color.
a little bananas. I'm like, how do I categorize this person? Well, this person was living when we played their piece, but now they're dead. So how do I categorize that person?
No, but it makes sense about
purgatory.
really, opening and expanding horizons and providing a venue for composers who are not getting
Out
their
there,
break.
and look, I love classical music. I'm a classical musician. I love it. But classical music, especially the bigger, not all of them, but there is an issue in the industry of programming the same music again and again and again and again. And we all know that white men, especially in classical music, have a leg up in the industry, right? And not to diminish their work, right? But we have a platform and we're going to use it, right? And our audience, they love it, we love it, and it's working really, really well. Like, to put that back to back and to say, look, we can relate Beethoven to Florence Price, who grew up, an African-American
Right.
woman who grew up in Arkansas in the mid-century, right?
Right.
Like, there is a connection there, right? And that's the great thing about classical music, is you have this incredible history of hundreds of years. And if you start to think about it, it connects all the way up to what's happening today.
Absolutely.
And that's how we get young people in. That's how we keep the art form vibrant.
That's cool.
I like, too, that you have these themes
Yeah.
because it helps me to have a better understanding of the mood of the music that I'm going to hear. When you listen to classical, and if you're just reading the title of it, and it's like, et tout, tout.
Right.
And you kind of look at that and go, I don't think I'm feeling a toot today.
Or it's got a bunch of numbers, it's number 5, opus 6,
Yeah.
set number 3.
Yeah,
but
in F sharp
1970 Yeah, exactly.
And you
And
wake
you're
up
like,
and
what
it's
does that mean?
Like, I'm feeling just like that today.
right.
But if I am feeling, and if I'm studying, like I said, right now, reading on resilience and the human mind, that immediately is like, that caught my attention right there.
Yeah,
Which is
good.
why you see, other groups playing like John Williams, or we're going to do the Star Wars, or we're going to play, the Wizard of Oz, or
Right.
to really kind of sand those edges down,
Right.
and allow people to come in.
Because when you're talking about beauty, and we think of music in terms of beauty.
Especially classical music.
Yes, especially classical music. But redefining the ideal, I think that is an excellent phrase, because it's basically saying that this is what has been established. This ideal has been established. But it
let's think
doesn't
about that.
mean that's right. that is the end all. That is the only way that it could be.
Yeah.
And I like that.
Yeah.
So that's one that would be of interest to me, because I want to see, how are they going to redefine this?
Yeah, and that actually, I can't think
good
of her
point.
name off the top of my head. So we're doing that that concert is in November 22nd, and it's at the Contemporary Art Museum. And the artist who's going to be in that space is opening this weekend. So the opening reception's tonight, and there's an artist talk tomorrow at 11. And that theme sort of relates to what that installation is going to be. So if you really want the full experience, go to CAM this weekend and then come to our concert in November, because that installation will be all around us as we play that concert. And she's questioning identity and beauty, and like that's part of that exhibit is interpreting beauty, and who gets to decide what's beautiful and why.
And I think that's a big question right now, in culture, in fashion. You know, what used to be that ideal model,
right,
is no longer that ideal model.
Exactly what we're questioning right now with this, because we've got Brahms, who's the beautiful, master composer Brahms, but then on the first half, we've got two living composers. One is from St. Louis. And so we're really, just juxtaposing, like, there's still, look at these other things that are beautiful, right? Like, let's not just get stuck on Brahms, right? There is more that's beautiful than this one very narrow definition of what's considered beautiful in classical music.
Well, it makes you think about your programming as it relates to what pieces and what composers you want to put together, or who you want to juxtapose.
Right.
And the message that you really want to leave, I think, is the key, because it's just like with any art form. We absorb it while we're sitting or while we're observing, but there's a greater impact once we're leaving. When you think about when you go somewhere with a friend and you've been to this exhibit and maybe you've had to be quiet, and then you're leaving to go to your car or to the next whatever you're going to do, and you have that discussion.
Yeah.
And that's where real intimacy occurs, because now it's like, well, I felt this way. And
it's that shared experience.
That's right, that shared experience. But then all of a sudden it's like, oh, Dana, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
But you did.
Yeah.
And now we share that. I heard that, but you didn't.
Right.
And so I think that is the real key, is the takeaway. What happens in the
I
conversation?
Loved that. I hated it.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's interesting.
Yeah. And the dynamics of a live performance versus listening to something on your headset.
It's all about live.
Live is, man, you're talking about when musicians are in the zone and they're all together, it's like, holy smokes, this is like a very powerful moment. It can really evoke emotion and...
Right. I think we were talking about this last week. We were talking about
Slatkin.
Yes, right.
With Carmina Burana down at the symphony. My wife saw that, and he said they were all in the zone. He just stepped off the podium and let them go.
And just let them go.
Yeah.
But I've been to the symphony where, to me, it was the conductor that was the center stage. Yeah. Not because he did anything that was... He wasn't trying to garner the attention, but he was so into it.
Right.
That... it was like every moment, every movement, I was right there, riveted to that person.
Yeah, that's cool.
So talk about because in chamber music, there is no conductor. You're all kind of really, you're keying off one another. You're looking, you're watching body movement, you're watching eyes. Talk a little bit about that process, because that's a different process.
It's a very different process. And actually, for Saturday night's concert, we will have a conductor for one of the pieces. Because sometimes you need one. You need one.
Yeah, so 1, 2, 3, hit it doesn't work.
Yeah, no, not for Kristen Custer's piece. That does not work. So actually, the piece that inspired this whole program is a piece by Kristen Custer, which she was inspired by Tadeo Ando, who is an architect. And she talks about light and refraction, and so we kind of came up with this window thing and went from there, built the program out around that. But we need a conductor for that piece. But it's really cool. We just had a kind of a limited amount of rehearsal, and we just needed to get instead of figuring out. So what we do when we don't have a conductor is, if you're playing Beethoven or Haydn or something like that, the beat is really steady and it doesn't change very much. And so rhythmically, it's pretty straightforward. And so to stay together, there's just a little visual. You're really listening, but you're using your vision quite a bit. Even if you don't think we're looking at each other, we are, right? Like, we're using our peripheral vision. And if you watch really carefully, you'll see us moving and cueing each other and giving each other the eye, and something like that. And something that's more complex, like David's piece or Kristen's piece, we have to make a lot of decisions about who's leading what.
Right.
And in Kristen's piece especially, that would have taken hours just to decide because it just would be constantly switching around. It wouldn't just be like the violin's in charge the whole time. Like it just wouldn't work that way. So, and there's a lot of tempo changes. So it speeds up, it slows down, it speeds up, wild tempo changes, which is fun as a listener because you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming, right?
Yeah.
And it's a very,
But that makes sense then to have the
yeah. We have Elka Overton's going to conduct us, and it's really an exciting piece. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Very cool. So,
wait, I have got a question. This is one of those, crazy Ellie questions.
Okay, crazy Ellie.
So, on the back here, season passes, 6 concerts for $100.
Yes.
But when I go to the front, I count 7
Well,
concerts.
the Confluence concert, the concert at the History Museum,
Right.
they're sponsoring that, so it's free. I know.
Whoa.
And not only had we already come up with this idea that Confluence would be our theme of the season, like relating to the rivers and the joining of ideas, and we wanted to be the season to be really focused on local like a local composer in every concert, which we always do local composers, but not on every single concert, right? And they happen to be having a Mississippi River exhibit at the same time.
Cool.
And so this will be our 3rd or 4th year doing a partnership with them, tying into their exhibits. And so that one's free. That's why. And we also have a free event coming up. It might not have gotten out in the information you have here because it just happened on October 3rd. We're launching a new partnership with the St. Louis County Libraries, and we're going to do 2 free events this year. And so our first one is on October 3rd, and that's called a very open rehearsal. So the audience, it's not just a passive listening experience. It's that we invite the audience to ask us questions during the rehearsal. So I'll be moderating, so you can interrupt me, not the musicians. But if you're like, why is the violin doing this? What are you doing here? Like, why does the music sound like this? We've had at these very open rehearsals where we can't decide how fast to go. We can't choose the tempo. We play it 2 ways for the audience and they vote. We like it faster.
Oh, that's
we
cool.
like it slower. You're like, can you come to every rehearsal and help us?
I would say where children would really get
It's
a
cool.
lot from
Yeah,
this.
it's a really cool thing. It's free and it's an actual working rehearsal. We will be preparing a music by Florence Price for the October 11th Resilient program.
but you're like the moderator, so they're not like, hey, I got a question while you're in the middle of the piece.
Right. So I'll kind of be in between. I'm not playing on that piece. It's string quartet. And so I'm, kind of will be facilitating.
She gets to be the one that tells the little kid.
Not now.
I was thinking more like sit down and shut up.
Quit popping your gum.
Yeah.
That's not in the music.
No. We want, it's very, and as musicians, like, talk about failing. We are trained from the get-go that when you play in front of another human, you need to be perfect, right? That the performance level should be high. So here we are rehearsing for the first time something we've not played together in front of people. It goes against every instinct we have.
Unlike the jazz musicians, they love to get together and they just kind of fill it in right off of each other.
Right.
But you all are saying
they're
that yours is
trained to do that. See, we aren't trained to do that. We're trained the opposite way, right? Our training is all practice, then perform. And so here we're letting you in at the beginning. And the first couple of these we did, we were all just terrified. I mean, like shaking. We were so scared because we messed up. We had to stop. We failed horribly. We couldn't get through the piece, But then, so we run it at the beginning, failures and everything, and we work on it. And at the end, we run it for the audience again so the audience can hear the difference, right? Like this is the work musicians are doing in rehearsal. So that's pretty cool. So that's
cool.
At the Thornhill branch, which is in Creve Coeur, I think, from 7 to 8 on October 3rd.
Very cool.
And that also lets budding musicians know that it does take a lot of work, a lot of collaboration in order to make the sound that you come and hear at the performance sound like what it sounds like.
It's not just talent here. It's like hard work.
Hard work and talent. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we've been talking to Executive Director of Chamber Project St. Louis, Dana Hotle. Dana, thanks for coming in
Thanks
today.
for
And don't
having me.
forget their program tomorrow, Through the Looking Glass window at the 560 Music Center. It's 7:30 p.m. And you can get that information more at chamberprojectstl.org, chamberprojectstl.org. So thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
You have been so inspirational.
Thank you.
Yes, very
Yeah.
nice. Very nice. Thank you.